And we're back. We just finished talking about keyboard controls in this COMP392 Week 8, Part 3. Now we're back to Part 4 of our broadcast, right? And we're going to talk about some of the ways we just detected our movement, right? And I'm going back to this game loop, continuing from last time. And in our game loop, we have our movement move forward. Well, this is a great place to start, but here's what I know that I'm going to need. I'm going to need to know when I'm grounded, okay? The reason why is if I don't know if I'm grounded, then I can press the space bar forever, and it's going to just make it. It's going to be like a jetpack, right? He's not going to stop moving up if I move him up, right? So I need to be able to do that. So there's two ways to do this grounded stuff, right? I can detect it in the global space. I can say is grounded as a variable, and basically what I'm saying is when I jump. Once I jump a certain time or whatever, or if I fall off the edge of my map, I can't tell. By the way, one thing I cannot tell with collisions is I can't tell when I'm stopping to collide, which is a problem, right? I'm always colliding right now. I've collided with my object. I've collided once, right? But I can't tell when I've left the object, when the objects are not colliding anymore. There isn't a a way of doing that in a very simple fashion, right? So I can't tell if I've left. So how do I tell if I'm still grounded? Now, there's a couple ways. I could use raycasting, right? Which is more advanced, right? Which we'll talk about raycasting a little bit. But for now, let's keep it simple, and let's go into using just some regular controls here. I'm going to make another variable in the global space. We're going to call it isGrounded, right? Because I know I'm going to need this thing. And I'm going to make it a Boolean type. Right? Now, by default, I want it to be false, right? I want it to be false. And I want to explicitly say that here in my initialization. So when I have by the way, my pointer lock, here's my pointer lock. If I wanted my keyboard controls to only work upon pointer lock, I have to instantiate my object in here if I have pointer lock for the first time. Right? So if I have pointer lock, I can instantiate my object, my keyboard controls object, right? Now, there's a challenge to that in that if I'm checking my loop, my game loop, and I haven't instantiated my object, right, then it's a problem, right? But I want to be able to stop the player from moving as well. That's another thing I want to be able to do. If I have to actually get moving, I want to stop the player from moving when my screen is locked. So when I'm not in pointer lock, when I haven't clicked into my screen and I want my player to stop moving somehow. So I have to almost have an idea of how to enable and disable my controls, okay? Now that can be something that's part of the controls themselves. So I can change the control class to say my controls are on, my controls are off, right? Enabled, disabled, almost like that kind of methodology, right? If I make it so that it is enabled as a property, and what would you do? Would you make it as a property, or would you make it as a method, enabled, disabled? Method or property? What's your call? So should I make it so my enabled property is a Boolean that starts off as false, or should I make it I have an enabled, disabled method that creates a change? What would you do? Property, right? Which is probably the nicer way to do it. So let's add this in as well, but I want to add it to the control itself. So I want to go back to my keyboard control class that I was just writing. Right here it is. I know I'm going to need that, and there's another property I'm going to add in that I'm going to call this public enabled, right? And it's just a Boolean, right? Now, one thing I will say is that by default, my this dot enabled, right, is equal to false. When I first create this class, it's false. And the reason for this is I want to make it so that I have to turn it on, right? I have to turn it on, right? All it's keeping track, all of this class does is it keeps track of states. Am I pressing? Am I not pressing? Am I enabled? Am I disabled? That's all I want to know, right? So if that's true, right, and I've done this to my class now, I'm going to go back to my code, right, because I need to add this in. Now, the grounded piece is more of a player thing, not a class thing, right? Not an object thing. So let's try this out here for a second. So I'm going to do this. If I have pointer lock, then my controls are enabled, right? But I haven't instantiated my controls yet here, So I'm probably going to want to instantiate my controls up here, right? I put them down here for a reason. I'm going to move them up, right? So here's where my lonely keyboard controls are sitting right now, down on line 178. I'm going to move them out of here, X. And I'm gonna put them just after this check to see if we have pointer lock, right? So in here, I'm gonna kind of describe my controls. So I have my controls here, right? And now inside here, I'm gonna say something like this. If I have pointer lock before I do anything else, then you know what? My keyboard controls dot enabled is equal to true, right? How do I lose pointer lock, right? Well, that's nice. This is a nice thing to do here in PointALot, right? But where I really want it is in here into my state changes. When I change my pointer lock, when pointer lock is changed, that's when I want to go true or not true, right? So this is nice, but that's not a great place to put it. But somewhere with pointer lock is what I want to do. So let's just get rid of that. So let's go back to my two little event handlers here. Let me make some more room. And in my event handler, one of them is called if pointer lock change. So my pointer lock change event. So that means, well, okay, I want to enable our mouse or keyboard controls here. Look, it even says it here. I haven't put it in here as a stub. So I'll put that in. So here's my keyboard controls enabled. And then I want to disable them up here, right? So when I don't have I don't have pointer lock, then my keyboard controls are disabled. Okay, cool. If my keyboard controls are disabled, right, then what I want to do is not be able to check to see if I can move my keys. Uh-oh, how do I disable my keys? This is where, going back to your statement, I want to make my function is going to be either, it's a state, right? Disabled, enabled. How do I disable all my keyboard inputs now? Okay, but where do I check for that? That means I have to remove them and put them back every single time, right? Now we talk about a method, right? Now if I'm removing, I just went with what you said, right? I like your property idea, but in this particular case, because I'm moving them, I'm putting them in and taking them away, to me in my mind, it's a behavior. And whenever I talk behavior, I think method, not property, right? That's what I want the property to do. So actually what it should be is this, right? Let's just rename them now before we get into it. It's not gonna work, but just bear with me. I'm gonna say enabled, right? And this one will be up here, disabled, right? Bear with me while I do this stuff, and you're gonna go, what is he doing? He doesn't know what enabled, disabled yet. Well, I put them in, right? Let's do that. So I'm gonna go back to here, back into my keyboard control.ts file, right? Let's just go there for a second so you see what I'm doing. And hopefully you guys get the gist of what I'm doing in a second before I do this. All right, so here's my keyboard controls. And remember, look what I've done here. I said enabled is equal to false. Well, that's not cool. I want to get rid of this enabled thing. And it won't be enabled is equal to false. What I'm going to say, actually, is this. I'm going to take these things out of my constructor function, right, completely. And when it's enabled, I'm going to add event listener. Now, you've got to be very careful here, because if it's disabled and I remove my event listener, but there is no event listener in there, will it give me an error? Yes. So I've got to be very careful not to ever try to disable something that's never been enabled in the first place, right? So there's two ways of doing this. I could use type safety to do it. I could create a structure for myself, right, to check. One thing I will do is create some public functions, and they're going to be done before the method, these methods here, because I want to say something like this: public enabled, right, which is going to return void. That's all it's going to do. They're just behaviors, and I'm going to take these two things here, I'm going to cut them, and I'm going to put them in here. Whoop, enabled. All right, I'm not going to call them immediately in here in my constructor functions. When I make my object, they're not enabled. By default, there is no event listener for my keys, right? This is the key of this. This is the way we're going to do this. Public, right? Actually, let me just copy this whole thing, change it from enabled to disabled, right? And let's make this disabled. And let's make it from add event listener to remove event listener, it's got to be written the exact same way anyway, just like this. Take a look. Won't change anything here. Just won't go from add to remove, right? Okay, cool. There is no test, so right now there's no safety. If I click on this disabled and this hasn't been enabled already, we got a problem, right? Let's check this out and see if it'll give us an error. All right, so this is the first thing. So our class has been modified. So we've add an event listener when we enable it and remove the event listener when we disable it. Removing the event listener actually cleans things up a little bit for us, right? Because it takes away from the additional process or that we have running around, right? Our thread, the thread that we're using for our event handler or event listener we just decouple it, right? We just get rid of it when we use the remove event listener thing. It's good to clean up our work this way because every time we add an event listener, we actually add to the process, right? We don't want to do that. So this is actually a very good thing to do here, enable disable, almost like create destroy, an idea, right? We create something, we destroy something. This is our cleaning up function. Okay, cool. Let's go back and here in the code, right? Now that you guys, I'm just waiting for you guys to catch up. That's why I'm talking so much, right? I'm going to go back into my core. Here's my core. And now, remember, I have pointer lock. And if I have pointer lock, well, then there's going to be a pointer lock change. And then what's going to happen is when I get pointer lock, I'm going to enable everything. And when I lose pointer lock, I'm going to disable everything. Do I have a problem here? No, right? So my code is checking for me. Now, this is still, in my opinion, not the right way to write it because I should write some kind of check to say, hey, you can't disable something that hasn't been enabled, right? And the trick to this would be enable it once, or put them out there one time. But I don't want that to happen. All right, let's do this. So I'm going to check to see if this works. So before I do any kind of movement, and I'm going about it the long way, but this is what I want to do. All right, so let's refresh everything, and I'm going to go back in here and notice I got my player hit the ground. I want to move my keys around, and I don't have nothing going on with my keys. I can't press spacebar, nothing, right? If I click on it though, right, I get responses. If I click on it, if I press escape, I get nothing. Well, wait, I get something. How come my events are still firing? This is bad. How come? Remember, I said it was supposed to be disabled. Are you getting it disabled? So we use the bind event, right? Remember, we kind of did the same thing. We just copied and pasted, right? Is there an unbind? Let's go back. And if I was to check JavaScript, this is JavaScript 101 kind of thing, right? Well, actually, it's JavaScript 201, a little bit more advanced, right? So if I say bind event JavaScript, right? So jQuery bind is there. That's one thing I want, but I don't want the jQuery bind. I want the JavaScript bind, the bind method, right? So here's an example of my JavaScript, right? And I want to use the bind method to dispatch an event, right? That's what I'm really doing, right? So here it's giving me add an event listener, and I'm using this bind to this. That's what we're doing. Okay, but how do I clean this up? How do I unbind? Is there a way of unbinding this event? Because once I've done this, and look what it says, if you comment out the line of the code that uses bind, uncomment the line of the code that uses that event listener. Without bind, and then rerun the code, the data ready handler function will fail. And the reason for this is because data ready handler, right? The only way this is going to fire, right, if this on data completed is true. But let's not look at this for a second. This is just an example of how to do this from an execution order perspective, right? I want to get rid of the binding, right? So is there a way of unbinding? Is there an unbind event? And if you look at it, if I go to the, well, here's a remove event listener, right? But I want to binding and unbinding events, right? So here's the bind event. Where is it here? Hopefully they'll show it. And they do not. Remove event, bind event. But actually, they don't show it here. Let's do it on our own. Let's see if I can do it for you without showing you an example online. So So here we have our two events. I'm going to go back to my objects. I'm going to go back to my keyboard controls. Right, here's my TS. And now we have this. And if I go, just to try it out, if I go unbind, does that work? No, it does not work because there is no unbind event, right? Here's something else. Do I need the bind event anyway? Right, we talked about this. So let's take them away. Let's do something. Let's do a test. Let's get rid of this unbind thing altogether. Do one of these in this particular case, and just get rid of this altogether. Don't bind anything because we're going to call a handler to do this stuff, right? We're going to also call an event listener. Will this still work on the document object, right? So I'll save this work. So I've changed this thing here, and I'm going to go back to my code. Yeah? And let's see if can I move everything? No. I go here. No, I don't get anything now. I can't do anything. I mean, I can go here, but my events don't work at all. Your event should not work when you don't use the bind. And the reason for that is because it's the document model that we're binding to. And that's why we need this. That's why there's some, I'm just putting it out there for you guys, right? So if I undo, 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 you can see that the bind event, right, is required, right? Can't bind to null, all right? But notice how I have this on key down bind to this. But now, what about if I just did this? If I said, well, don't worry about the binding stuff. Let's get rid of it. So all I'm doing is pointing to the event that I want to cancel. Let's do this. I don't care about the cancelable or whatever, because I can do this. Just remove a listener. I could do it as small as this. Does this make a difference? I'm going to save everything, right? Get rid of this thing. Let's see what it does now. So I'm not clicked, and I can't move, but I click onto it. I can move. I press escape, and I still can move. Escape's not working. I don't understand. What else can I do? What else can I do to explicitly unbind my events? And first of all, did I unbind my events? Did it even go there? Did that even fire? Did that like remove or disable thing work? Right? Well, we have to check it. We're doing some troubleshooting here to figure out what's going on, right? So we've created a binding for an event. We've tried to unbind it with remove event lister. Not working. Can anyone out there find a solution? Because you're going to work on this kind of stuff again. So find a solution. How do I unbind, when I've already bound with pure JavaScript, plain old JavaScript? Is there a solution to this problem, right? I'm pointing it out because I ran into it when I was doing all this testing over the last week or so. And if you have a solution, all the power, baby. Okay, here's something I want to try, right? I want to try and do a console.log. So before I go to the binding or the unbinding here inside my code, I want to say something like, disabled. I want to know when I'm disabled or enabled. How about that? So we're going to say, keyboard controls disabled as an output for more code, for more troubleshooting. Keyboard controls disabled, and I'll copy this whole thing in here. Actually, I'll put this at the bottom. That's where they really should be. They're only disabled after I do both these things, so theoretically I should put it at the bottom, practically. And I'll do the same thing over here with this. I'll say keyboard controls enabled, right? So we can have some kind of output to the console when this is happening, right? So I can monitor what's going on, right? Okay, cool. So let's see this out here. So I'm going to refresh my screen. Hey, here's something I want to try, just in case something else is going on. I want to use my localhost 8080 here, right? And I want to go and put it into incognito mode, just to make sure that something else isn't going on. Because unfortunately, caching is a real fact of JavaScript, right? So here in incognito mode, I'm going to paste and go, right? And here I am. I'm going to click to play. And I'm going to escape to escape. I'm going to press my inspector here. I've already, escaped. And I don't have pointer lock anymore. But can I move things forward and back? And no, I can't, right? I press in there. Yes, I can, right? It's keyboard controls enabled. I press escape. Then, oh man. wait a minute, I did it this last time. Look, I enabled, right, way up here. Let's refresh, I'll show you what I'm talking about. I'm just using this mode here. So I can't do anything. I'm pressing my keyboard controls, right? Press my space bar, nothing, right? I click onto it, right? Now my controls are enabled. I press the up button one time, right? Now I press escape, keyboard controls disabled. It says pointer lock disabled. So that kind of comes up down here. And now if I press the up bar, it doesn't do anything. So I know that I'm getting to the method. The method, I'm getting to that method. The method's not working. Okay. Come on, what other ways? I want to unbind. Have you guys found it online? Google it. We found a way to unbind a keyboard event once I've bound it. While you're working on that, I'll work on something else. Hey, it'd be nice, right, if I can make my cube move now, right? So while you're doing that, I'll make my cube move. I'm going to go here to my controls. And inside of my game itself, here's my game.ts file while you guys are looking that up. I've got this thing now that I can detect when I'm grounded, right? I want to see if I'm grounded, then I want to use these controls to move forward and back and all that stuff, right? Otherwise, I don't care, right? I won't allow myself to move forward and back, right? Now this is different. This is different than if, as an example, I'm not grounded. So let's check this out. So I'm going to say, well, if is grounded, right? Then I want to be able to move my controls, right? So let's move that up, and I'll format the code. Right now it starts off as is grounded is equal to false, but you know I want to be able to move this around again. Right now, is there a way of getting my is grounded to true? No, right? But there is a way. I can say one of these. I can go back into my collision step, and I can say, well, look, if my player collides with the ground, right, then is grounded is equal to true. Uh-oh. But if I do it, it happens only once. As soon as I collide with it, I'm grounded. And when I'm not grounded anymore, I can't tell, right? So I have to be able to figure that out. There's some tricks to this, right? So here's my event name, my ground. My player hit the ground, so is grounded is what I want to say here, right? But what I want to do is I want to say is grounded is equal to true, right? Okay, cool. Is grounded is equal to true. There's no way of getting me false yet, right? Because I haven't done anything with jumping. When I jump, that's a way of knowing that I'm not grounded. I'm not using any kind of complicated raycasting yet, which I will do eventually, but not yet, okay? And what I want to do is something like this. If my keyboard controls forward, I want to keep track of something called velocity. Okay, velocity. I want to be able to track my velocity depending if my keyboard controls are pressed forward or back or whatever. Okay. Remember we talked about that clock, that angry clock we kind of made earlier, right? I kind of instantiated the clock object. I'm going to use it now, right? So if I'm moving forward, right, not only do I want to have a message like I'm moving forward, but I want to do one of these. I want to set up a velocity, right? Velocity. I don't have a velocity object yet, but I will, right? And here's something that I want to do only if my controls are enabled, right? So if my controls are enabled, then I want to be able to, you know, do my thing, right? My controls are either disabled or enabled, right? I'm going to test for that. So how do I test for that? I'm going to do one of these. This is the way to stop some of this stuff from happening, right? It won't unbind my keyboard events, right? It won't do that, but I can stop it from showing, right? Here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to say, but now I gotta test it somehow, right? I gotta test it somehow, which means under my keyboard controls, back to what Stephen was saying, right? Back to what Stephen was saying about having my enable disabled method. Does anyone figure it out? How to unbind? You guys figured it out yet? This is nice, this enable disabled, right? But I want to have something that where if my my controls are enabled or disabled, this is nice if it's a method, right? I can't test for it though. I can't test to see the way I've written it if it's disabled or enabled, right? So here's how you change it. I'm going to return this Boolean value, right? So here's Boolean. That's what it's going to return, right? And I'm going to say return true, right? If I've called my enable, then I'm going to return true, right? Uh-oh. That's bad, right? But then it'll never go back to false. Once I've done it, I'm always going to test true because my controls are always going to be enabled because this value is always going to be of true, right? So that's bad. How do I do that without using an extra variable? Well, I can't. I need to be able to track it somehow, right? So I have to create another public Boolean, right? Going back to what you said earlier, we're waffling between the two methods, right? So if I'm going to control things, I'm just putting it out there for you. So if you're going to plot things up, we're building this application together, right? This is some of the problems I want to step you through that I had. And I'm doing it in a way that I know the answer already, but I'm showing you the problem so that way you don't run into this, you don't kind of, I don't want you to make a train wreck, right? I want you to try something and you're like, Tom, I don't know why, but it's still happening. Well, there's a way around it, and I'm going to show you the workaround. Let's go back to the older way, the other way we did it, back to what we did before. So we said public enabled is a Boolean. We already have something called enabled here. We're going to get rid of this stuff because we can't enable disable, right? So I'm going to do one of these, right? All I can do is test, right? So cut this and put it into my constructor because you know what? We're never going to be able to remove it anyway. No point. And get rid of these two things. Bam. Okay. But I will keep track of if my controls are enabled. And by default, I want to say that this dot enabled is equal to false. So this is where I can do some testing. Okay. Going back to my game.ts, I got some errors now because I've got some stuff that doesn't work anymore. But one thing I can do is inside my event listener here for my change event, if I go back to my, from here, I can test to see if it's grounded, right? And further than that, before that, I can test to see if my controls are enabled. So I can do something like this. I can go if, keyboard control not enabled, if that's true, right? That's the only time that I'm going to do any kind of testing for this stuff, right? Which is kind of going to save my, my rear end here, right? And let's just format that. So boom, let's format it. And now we have a double condition. The controls have to be enabled and it has to be grounded before we move, okay? We'd still have to play with this velocity in a second. Let's go fix the other two errors. I got a couple errors for enabled and disabled, right? Let's click on this one. So there is no disabled and there is no enabled, but we can do something like this. The keyboard controls enabled is equal to true, like we had it before. And we can do keyboard controls enabled is equal to false, which kind of solves our issue, right? To show you this problem. Okay. This is kind of cool. We've got that working out. Inside my game loop, right? Inside my game loop somewhere, in my lonely game loop, right? Here it is. I need a velocity now. That's my last error. And let's go up to save this problem that I have. So I'm going to go to variable. I'm going to create a velocity. And my velocity, I want my velocity to be of type vector3, right? Because my velocity is going to have, it can act on any angle or whatever, right? So I'm going to say var velocity, again, a global variable, is equal to a Boolean. Hey, just keep this in mind. One day we're going to extract these out and we're going to make a player class, right? Where my is grounded and my velocity is part of my player class, not part of my global context here, right? But just FYI, we're just taking it one step at a time. I don't want to confuse the crap out of you all, right? All right, so here's this grounded, here's my velocity, and instead of making it a Boolean, so that's incorrect, I want to make it a vector3, which I've kind of, shortcutted, right? Vector3, which is actually a 3.vector3 object. That's what it is. Okay, cool. Now that I have that velocity as something that I've put in here, right? I can go back down to this little thing here and start typing. So velocity, and I want to start with my Z controls for my move forward, minus equals to, I don't know, let's use a number like 400, right? 400.0 times delta. Well, I don't have a delta yet, right? I have to set that up. I have to set up a delta and a time, right? And I'm going to set them up inside when my controls are enabled only. So in my controls are enabled, I want to set two local variables here in my loop, right? One of them is going to be called time. I'm going to give you these because from a time perspective, this is going to be a number. And here's something that's going to be interesting. I'm going to start typing performance right, performance, notice how it's part of JavaScript now, right? What performance now is going to give me as a number, right, to give me the start time, right? Here's the delta. Delta is the change in time, right? Delta, right, which is also a number, which is equal to time minus previous time. I don't have previous time yet, but I will, right? Time minus previous time, right, and divided by 1,000. And down in here, at the bottom, right, of my loop, way at the bottom, before I request animation frame, I'm going to type in something like this. Previous time is equal to time. I don't have previous time yet, but I will, right? And I don't want to create or the default for my previous time in here, right? Because that would be bad. I want to set my previous time somewhere else, right? And I'm probably going to initialize that to 0 here in the variables up here, right? So I'm going to do something like this: var previous time is a number, right? And you know what? Just keep it simple. I'm going to initialize it right here to 0. Couldn't do that, but hey, what the hell? Okay, going all the way down, I've got my way of keeping track of my previous time and my delta. And now I can go back here and see that delta is actually a calculation that I'm using. Delta is equal to time minus previous time divided by 1,000, which is going to say, hey, every millisecond that goes by, every tick, right, I'm going to get my delta, which is going to multiply, depending on how far I've gone, it's going to multiply it by 400 to get my accelerated velocity, right? So I'm going to actually accelerate my delta is going to change. The longer I press the button down, and the longer I do that, it'll measure how long I'm pressing the button down. It'll add more and more force to my character. Okay. Okay, cool. So that once I've got this, then I can do the same thing for the others, right? So I'm going to say velocity dot z plus equals to 400 times delta, right? This is the change in time, right? And velocity dot x minus equal to, this is for moving backwards. Did I do it right? No, I did not. This is actually here, right? Because this is x and z. This is z moving forward and back. And velocity dot x, this is for moving left, is minus equal to 400, right, times delta. And then it'll be the same thing for the other direction. For the right, it'll just be plus equal to. And now for the up, this is where it gets kind of funky. I want to give myself a bit of velocity because after testing, I noticed that velocity.y, right, means something like 2,000. All right, if you don't give it like 2,000 times delta, not going to happen. It's not going to fly actually at all, right? And here's how I'm going to check to see if I'm grounded. Very simply, I'm going to say one of these. I'm going to say if, right, if my player dot position, right, dot y is greater than, let's say, 4, which I would be, then I know I've jumped, and therefore is grounded is equal to false, right? Because then if I've jumped up, then I'm not on the ground anymore, and then, you know, or if somehow I've been moved, someone shoved me out of the ground, or whatever, and by the way, I can do another check like this, see if I'm under the ground, right? Then I'm not grounded anymore. If I'm above the ground or under the ground, I'm not grounded, right? I can make a check like this. Right now, I'm only checking for this. I can check to see if that's happening. All right, let's see if this works. But we can't do anything yet. We haven't done anything yet. And this is where we add the forces. So I'm going to say something like this. Player, right? I want to add my my force, right, to this thing. So I'm going to say player apply central force. That's what I'm going to use. I'm not going to use set position because it won't work, right? And here's my vector 3. What vector 3 am I going to use? Velocity. This is a very simple way of doing this thing, right? So what it's going to add velocity to a central force, but it's going to make my player fly, babies. Fly. All right, let's check this out and see what happens, right? We're going to refresh this incognito screen, go back, and whoa, what happened? I made a lot of changes. Remember we had this problem, and we didn't know what happened. I got an error somewhere. What's my error? And it says uncut type error, cannot read property X of undefined in fuzzy.js, right? PhysiJS 1016. I can't read my property X of undefined. Okay. What property X did I change? My velocity, right? Okay, did I define my velocity somewhere? No, right? So I need to put that in. So let's go back. So I'm going to go back to the top here. I've got my time and my delta time. And this is happening if my controls are enabled. One thing I forgot to do is declare my velocity. I'm going to say var, well, instead of velocity, I already have a velocity that I kind of decided, that I kind of created. I'm going to say var is equal to a new vector3 object. Every time that my keyboard controls are enabled, I create a new velocity, a new vector3 object, so I wipe out the old one, right? In fact, it's happening on the game loop. If my controls are enabled, every time I loop, my velocity is zeroed out every time, right? Because that's what happens when I do this, when my velocity is done like this. There's one error to this, and notice how I still get an error, right? My uncaught error of my velocity says my velocity.z, my x, and so on, right? I don't set my velocity in anywhere ever one time, right? I don't sit there and go, my velocity is the new vector3 object with 0, 0, 0, right? I don't want to do that here with my vector3 because if I set it as 0, 0, 0, it's bad, right? So I have never set my velocity as something ever, right? Just saying. I'm just putting it out there for you, right? So I need to set it for the first time somewhere, and my recommendation is somewhere else. And what I'm talking about is way up here somewhere, right? So my velocity is a vector3 object. Well, we're going to make it a new vector3 object right here or somewhere else, and we're going to make it 0, 0, 0, right? If I don't do this, then what happens is it's never been initialized, and so I can't add to it, right? Okay, cool. My player hit the ground, and now can I move my guy, my cube? Yes, I can, and he moves pretty good in all directions, right? Notice that my things are firing, right? And when I press escape, I can't move them anymore because my controls are disabled. Even though my event listeners are working, it doesn't matter, all right? So that's really in a nutshell. I'm going to put this up on GitHub because I went really fast at the end, right? And you'll have the ability for you to move your little cube around and be really happy with it going off into oblivion. What was that? You say player.add camera, and it's done, right? All right, let's go back, and when we come back next day, that's next week, right? We'll meet again next week. We'll add additional things. Remember that your stuff for assignment 3, part 1 is due Friday. I'm looking for a plan for your game. It's due Friday night at midnight. You have to, whether you're alone, working alone, or with someone else, you need to have your plan ready for me and hand it in by Friday. Okay, guys, take care.